You are now listening to the Fantasy Whisper podcast with your hosts, Johnny Game Time Hicks and Big Travie.
Well, hello and welcome to the Fantasy Whispers podcast. This is episode 11. That's Big Travie, and I'm Johnny Game Time Hicks, and we're here to give you that fantasy football fix on this awesome Tuesday. Travis, how you feeling, man? How's your Tuesday?
My Tuesday is great, Johnny. Just doing some last-minute prep for that barbecue action tomorrow. You know what it is. We're going to be grilling brats, burgers, adorning the red, white, and blue, and reminiscing about the land of the free and the home of the brave. But first, we've got some business to take care of, Johnny. We got to give these people our 11 through 20 rankings, and I'm pretty psyched about what we've got on the plate for everybody today.
Yeah, I'm super pumped about today's episode. We're diving into those meat and bones of the wide receiver class. These are guys that you're going to want to scoop up to make your squad so much better, and it gives you that elite opportunity at one of those top wide receivers, because sure enough, one of these guys, if not two of these guys, will definitely make that jump. Like DeAndre Hopkins, that guy was in this area last year. But first, I got a question for you, Travis.
All right.
I was having a pretty good Tuesday. It was all right. But then I just went to Panda, and I had Panda for dinner, and now my belly's full of Panda. So my question is to you, what is your favorite Panda dish? Is it, you can't go with besides the orange chicken, all right? I get orange chicken. Everyone's favorite dish is orange chicken, all right? I'm talking beyond orange chicken here.
Well, listen, Big Travie has been known to be a little bougie, if you will. So I go for the premium. I go for that honey walnut shrimp.
Ooh.
Okay? I like me some shrimpies. I like to get the honey walnut shrimp. That's probably my favorite dish. And then I usually couple that with that sweet fire chicken. It's got a little bits of the pineapple in there. It's a little spicy. Both are premium dishes. You got to go after that, though, Johnny.
All right. I can feel that. All right. We're going to jump in with the little news and notes first before we get in the show.
News and notes from around the NFL.
All right, Travis, as always, our notes come from the Sleeper Bot. All right, we're talking the Packers, your Packers, man. Some news came out that the second-year running back Aaron Jones bulked up this offseason in an effort to become more durable and better at pass protection. But then the breaking news that came out today was that he might have bulked up a little bit too much and ended himself with a suspension without pay for the first two games of the 2018 regular season for violating the NFL policy and programs for substance and abuse. I'm sad about this, man. I was truly hoping that Aaron Jones would be one of those sleeper guys. You know, not many people were sure who the running back was going to be in Green Bay. And when we look at this guy, when you start to break down his stats, I mean, it was pretty impressive what he was doing. And he definitely had that type of, bell cow running back ability. This takes a huge hit, and now I'm not so certain about that.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the breakdown of the Packers backfield from the three guys that are, worth mentioning, Ty Montgomery was probably your best pass catcher, all the way around, but not a great runner. Mm-hmm. Okay, Jamal Williams is your best straight line runner. He's that one cut. He can run up the gut, and he's very good. But Aaron Jones was probably the most well-rounded. He's probably the guy I'm most excited about, probably still most excited. But I do think that Jamal Williams might see his value rise a little bit.
Yeah,
just because those first two games will give him a shot to really take the first crack at this job. And they've already said that they'll run the hot hand, but they've also said that it's open to whichever guy takes hold of it. So look out for that. I think that this definitely is just a boost for Jamal Williams, though.
Okay. And the only other significant news that came out was that the Patriots wide receiver Julian Edelman did appeal his suspension, but it got denied, so he will serve his full 4-game suspension for the PED violation. Travis, we talked about it. We didn't say that we were going to downgrade Brady based on this before. This just solidifies what we both thought was going to come. And to me, it just doesn't. I'm fine with Brady. I'm not going to change him in my ranks. But where exactly would you start to think about to draft Julian Edelman? And are you now raising Hogan up a little bit of a couple rounds, or maybe above a couple other wide receivers because of the absence of the first 4 games?
Yeah, I kind of like Hogan too. His problem has always just been health, staying on the field. But Brady did look to Hogan a lot last year. I don't know about Edelman just yet. I want to see some more of how they're using the rest of the offense in the preseason and such. So I'm reserving judgment on Edelman. And Mark Ingram. I want to see what comes out of New Orleans camp. Some of these guys that are suspended, I'll reserve a little judgment before I make my bet. And you got to let what happens in the preseason is these ADPs kind of fluctuate. I like to see those level out, see how that really works before I start making a final call on guys that I'm suspended worth going. But it probably wouldn't be anywhere before the 5th, 6th round for me, just off face value.
All right, Travis. That's all for the news and notes. You ready to jump into it?
Let's do this.
All right, let's get it. All right, we're starting our wide receiver number 11 with Tyreek the Freak. Travis, are you concerned at all with the new quarterback and his ability to connect on the long bombs with Tyreek Hill this year? Or are you just as confident as ever in the fact that like Tyreek's always been kind of a boomer bust kind of guy who's always ended up as a top wide receiver in fantasy? What's your thought process going into this season?
I would be concerned if it wasn't Patrick Mahomes, pretty much, as far as quarterbacks. These two just seem to be suited for each other. You look at Pat Mahomes and what he's able to do. He is excellently accurate at the deep ball. And you look at Tyreek Hill, you look at last year, he racked up 1,183 yards on 105 targets. 628 of those yards, Johnny, were on deep balls. So passes thrown 20 yards or more down the field. All 8 of his 2017 touchdowns were from depths of 30 yards or more. This guy is a home run hitter. So yes, you're going to have a couple games where he's not giving you a lot of yards. He could make you pay for it. But as far as excitement and as far as ceiling goes, this guy can blow the top off of any defense. He was Pro Football Focus's 6th best wide receiver in yards per route run last year, and he finished as wide receiver 5. So give me Tyreek Hill. Of all these guys kind of in this area, he's definitely got the huge upside, and he's definitely got that wow factor.
I mean, yeah, like I mentioned before, he's going to be inconsistent. That's who Tyreek is. He's kind of been inconsistent because you're depending so much on that long ball. But let's not forget, last year in the preseason, when they just drafted Patrick Mahomes, in the second half of one of the games, the very first play that they threw was a Tyreek go, a 9 route by Patrick Mahomes, and he hit him right on this money, and he scored a touchdown. Like it was a long bomb touchdown too. Yeah. So I'm okay with that aspect of it. I know what I'm getting, and 5 out of the 9 routes he runs on the route tree, he is elite in. So you're not only talking about the 9 route, but you're talking about other routes within that route tree, and he still excels at that. So he does have a little bit more tricks up his sleeve than just that long bomb, but that certainly helps him in the back pocket because the corners will slack off a little bit because they're afraid of that top speed. Kansas City does have a tough schedule for wide receivers, and here's such an interesting stat is that 27% of the TD market share that Kansas City had last year went to Tyreek Evans. However, he had 0 10-zone targets, which means when they're in the 10-yard line towards the end zone, he didn't get any targets. So that's a little bit concerning. But again, if you're getting long bomb touchdowns, you'll take those all day of the week and twice on Sunday, So you're looking at a guy who's getting 19% target share of a team that's super elite when you're talking about all the offensive weapons. I really do like Tyreek this year, and I just know what you're drafting when you draft him. He's going to be a little bit more risk, but balance that out with a couple of these guys that we're going to talk about a little bit later that are more consistent, and I think you're going to set yourself up with a good wide receiver duo.
Yeah, I think making sure you watch the rapport that's being built between Mahomes and Tyreek Hill this year, because he has as much a shot as anybody to be the number one guy there. That means he could actually move in front of Travis Kelce for targets in the red zone if Mahomes gets a liking for him. So just pay attention to that kind of thing.
All right, we're going from a guy who's, super boom or bust to a little bit more sure-handed. That's a guy, Larry Fitzgerald, from my own backyard, from my own love of my heart. Travis, I'll let you kick off Larry Fitzgerald so that way I can try to contain my excitement and my love for Larry. Legend.
I got to say it's hard to hate on Larry Fitzgerald. He does everything the right way. He's a true pro. I remember going to a Packers-Cardinals playoff game a couple years ago and watching him just put the dagger in the Packers' heart and just having nothing but respect for the guy. And why not? I mean, you look at him, 3 straight seasons with 100-plus catches. In the last 2 seasons, he's been a wide receiver 1 in terms of red zone targets. And then you look at Sam Bradford, who's thrown him the ball this year. You look at the way that Fitzgerald runs through the slot. He runs a ton of his routes through the slot. And then you look at Bradford's history. I mean, you look with the Rams, he loved Amendola. 81% of his targets were in the slot. You look at Jordan Matthews. He loved him when he was in Philly. 93% in the slot. Stefon Diggs last year, who Bradford had a liking with in the brief time that he was in. 63% in the slot. So I think that Fitzgerald's set up for success. There's nobody around him. And so the volume should be there. And he's had 3 straight years of at least 6 touchdowns and 1,000 yards. The guy is as sure as you can get. And the lack of depth around him means his volume will be through the roof. What say you about your boy?
I mean, Larry, if you're watching this, please come back for more than just this 1 year, man. But when I'm talking about fantasy, in the last 6 seasons, this guy has only had less than 100 targets one time, and that was he had 96 targets that season, and that was back in 2014 when we went through. I don't even want to talk about those quarterbacks right now. They didn't bring any wide receivers in that's going to scare you away. I mean, I do like Mr. Captain Kirk on the outside. However, he's not going to really make a dent in Larry Fitzgerald's targets this year. Sam Bradford, best throws are to the short and intermediate routes like you were talking about. I love his draft value so much right now. I think that where he's going in drafts, it's an absolute steal. And I think that, we had a comment here. I'm going to throw it up on the screen. Isn't he 40? And I think
he's a man. He's 40.
He's 40. But that just goes to show, people are going to sleep on him because of his age. But the stats have all pointed toward him being super consistent. So if you can get Larry on your team, I highly advise to do so.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at what he said, I never really need to be rejuvenated. I love the competition. I love hearing people say, he's 35. He's too old to do this still. So he's talking about you, Chris Hannon, and he's saying he's coming for it this year. He has no fear about being too old or being washed up. He puts in the work, and that's what you can get. You can still get production from the older guys when they're workhorses like he is.
Mm-hmm. All right, moving on to our next wide receiver. Little glimpse, a little whisper on the wall over here. We got T.Y. Hilton. Travis, we've been ramping and raving about T.Y. Hilton and just all of the offseason noise that are going on with the Colts and Andrew Luck. But I got a couple of questions for you, Travis. Okay. Do you have any idea who the number 2 wide receiver for the Colts is?
They picked up Ryan Grant, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's my point. Ryan Grant was an unrestricted free agent when he was picked up by Washington. never really showed anything. So you bring him into the Colts. I'm not saying that he's going to be irrelevant this year. I think any team with Andrew Luck at the helm, that wide receiver is going to have some relevance if you're the number 2. But when you're looking at T.Y. Hilton, in 2016, he was the number 5 wide receiver in the league. In the 3 years prior to last year, I'm going to throw out last year because Andrew Luck wasn't in last year, and he saw 119 or more targets every single year. His height is only 5'9", but don't expect him to get a ton of touchdowns. He's more of a long bomb kind of guy, a lot like Tyreek Hill. But at his current draft value of 3.10, I think he's an absolute steal. I think that you can get him and use him as your wide receiver 1 if you decide to go running back in your first 2 rounds. And I would be so content as T.Y. as my number 1, as long as Andrew Luck is showing that he's going to be there for this season and he's not showing, any noodle arm syndrome coming back from that, surgery.
Noodle arm syndrome. I need to write that down and get checked for that.
It's a new thing. I looked it up on
pre-existing condition. Huh?
I looked it up on the internet on
WebMD.
WebMD. Okay.
All right. Well, I think you hit a couple points there with T.Y. Hilton. We're excited, right? Andrew Luck has a real shot at getting back this year. He's actually throwing a football, so that's a great start, obviously. You look at T.Y. Hilton in 2016, as you mentioned, he had 1,448 yards. That led the NFL in receiving yards. And then, you look at last year, he didn't hit the 1,000-yard mark. So for me, he's topped 100 targets in each of his years that he's been in the league. So the volume will have to be there because he's never scored more than 7 touchdowns in a year. Mm-hmm. But he's also never finished outside the top 25 as a fantasy wide receiver. I think that the Colts, as you said, will have little amount of weapons around him, and so T.Y. should have the volume that he needs to be that number 1 guy. And so I do like him as a safe play. Definitely like him if you can get him as your second wide receiver, if you want a little wide receiver heavy in the first couple rounds. I just think that he's got all the makings to have a huge bounce back year this year, similar to maybe like a Keenan Allen. His value has dipped a little bit like last year, and we could see the volume do wonders as it did for Keenan Allen last year.
Yep. We got a comment here from Matt Podman about Phillip Dorsett. Are you concerned about Phillip Dorsett eating into any of T.Y. Hilton's targets?
No, I think they'll be just kind of secondary. It'll be a battle between Ryan Grant and Dorsett for the secondary targets. I think that as long as T.Y. and Andrew Luck are on the same starting lineup, we know who, Luck's going to trust.
Yeah. Speaking about trust, this next guy has a lot of trust with his quarterback in Doug Baldwin. Travis, what are you expecting from Doug Baldwin this year? Are you super high on him? Are you thinking that he's going to regress a little bit with that offensive line being so terrible and not a lot of options at the wide receiver? So he might get a little bit more double teamed action than he's seen before. Are those concerns to you, or is that just noise?
No, those are genuine concerns, Johnny, that he will get double teamed. The only other thing, though, is that there's not much around him. You look at Paul Richardson and Jimmy Graham, they leave. That's a whopping 34% of the target share that's up for grabs now. So, yes, he could get doubled, but the volume is going to be there. And he was a very efficient guy last year, 13.2 yards per reception, had a career high in targets with 125. And I just think that with those guys exiting and him, stepping up and being the tried and true wide receiver there and the only real option for Russell Wilson, he projects to have career numbers yet again and being a hands down number 1 option. What about you?
Yeah, I have a confession. Make this a little confession corner Tuesday, and that's shout out to my hometown league there, Tolton. But I've actually never owned Doug Baldwin, or I've never been a Doug Baldwin supporter. I should say I have owned him a couple of times, but they were only for a couple weeks. Then I traded him. Yet this guy comes out though every single year and just balls out. The situation, like you mentioned, it didn't get any worse, and in fact, it got a whole lot better for him. So after his 14 touchdown season a few years ago, where he really started to jump up into those top tier wide receivers, He had a 7 TD season and a 6 TD season. But like you said, with Jimmy Graham now gone and you got Paul Richardson now gone, I expect a lot more backyard football to be played. And I expect, a lot of those long bombs to now be going towards Doug Baldwin. He's going to be the most trusted receiver for Russell Wilson. So I actually really do like him this year. And then not only is their offensive line bad, but then that defense, man, it went from Legion of Boom to Legion of Pontoon. And by pontoon, I mean party bus or party boat, because everyone's going to be having a party on that defense. And they're going to have to throw the ball a lot in order to be in games. And so I see a lot of targets coming from Doug Baldwin. And so, yeah, if I can get a couple of shares of Doug Baldwin this year, I think it'll pay off for sure.
Yeah, I think the value is definitely there for Doug Baldwin. I just, you probably won't have to pay much based on what he could return for you. Yeah. So I'm a big fan of Doug Baldwin this year as well.
All right. So jumping into our next wide receiver here, a lot of people are going to go crazy because I know that we have a couple of
Denver Broncos fans make up 90% of our viewers.
Yeah. All right. Demaryius Thomas comes in. Travis, are you a little low on Demaryius Thomas, though, coming in this season? Are you expecting – you're not expecting big things from Case Keenum? You think that last year was a fluke, or you're just a little worried about Demaryius Thomas and where he's at in his career?
Yeah, I just think that we're starting to see the twilight of Demaryius Thomas's career. He's had his worst catch rate last year in the last 6 years with 59.3%, and his worst yards per catch in the last 6 years at 11.4. Before last year, DT hadn't not gained 1,000 yards since 2011, but you just see that they didn't have the consistent quarterback play. I just don't. Are we convinced that Case Keenum wasn't just a flash in the pan? Are we convinced that Case Keenum is an upgrade at quarterback? Between the line issues, Keenum's inconsistency should still be questioned, and DT's drop issues, there's some risk here. I think luckily for Thomas, they have a new offensive coordinator in Bill Musgrave. He's known as a friendly player offensive coordinator, or a player-friendly offensive coordinator. And, Keenum, if he does improve and they do work on this offensive line, we could see Thomas hit the 1,000-yard mark again. But for me, in a lot of these mock drafts, Demaryius Thomas is not coming up at a point in the draft where I feel comfortable drafting him and getting back on my return, or getting a return on that investment.
I'm going to actually go the opposite of you on this one, Travis. When I looked at Demaryius Thomas, initially I was on the same boat as you, but as I dug a little bit deeper, I mean, you're looking at a guy who still had 128 targets last year with, a trash can throwing him the ball. And as I can say that as a Cardinals fan last year, that I would have rather had our quarterbacks throwing than what the Denver Broncos had. And when you look at Adam Thielen had 128 targets last year. So he still has that TD upside for me on this team. He's had 8 10-zone targets last year, and that was the same as DeAndre Hopkins. He's finished as a wide receiver 1 or 2, 6 out of 6 years. So I know he's been in the league for 8. I understand, but I'm saying out of the last 6 years, all 6 of those years, he's been a wide receiver 1 or 2. He's finished that. He still has it he still has the ability to play the receiver position really well. 20% of his catches were contested catches last year, and he came down with all but 2 of them. So, yes, he is getting older, but he's evolving his game with his age. I think Demaryius Thomas is a solid wide receiver in fantasy. Again, he's not a guy that I want to go and say that, he's going to be my wide receiver 1. But certainly if you can get him as a wide receiver 2, I like that value there. I think you're really set if you can get him as a wide receiver 3 if he tends to fall that way. I'm not saying Case Keenum is going to be a world beater, but I certainly think that he could be better than what they had last year. And Demaryius Thomas was okay last year. I mean, he was startable in some situations. I certainly like the 128 targets, and I like to see him get over 100 targets again this season.
Yeah, I just think that for Case Keenum's style of play, that Emmanuel Sanders is the better value here. Emmanuel Sanders is the guy that Keenum will like to throw to more. I think he'll have the intermediate routes. He'll be the possession guy. And I just think that Demaryius Thomas's catch rate is concerning. It keeps dipping. He continues to have the drop problems. So unless we're, hearing at a training camp that Keenum just loves Demaryius Thomas and is hitting him all the time on these fade routes and in the end zone, I mean, I got to stick with something that's a little bit safer in that offense that's already going to be a little bit questionable. And for me, that's Emmanuel Sanders. So I just think the value is a little bit better there.
Sleeper bot just indicating, Case Keenum loves Demaryius Thomas. Whoa. How funny that came up right now. No, I'm just kidding.
Hashtag fake news.
Hashtag fake news. All right. What isn't fake news is who we've got next on the wide receiver slate. Travis, I'm gonna kick it off here for a second.
Can you dig it, sucker?
Can you digs it, Travi?
I can. I am a big fan of Stefon Diggs. I said, similar to my take on Thielen last week, I think the fact that Cousins has thrown for 4,000 yards and 25 or more touchdowns in the last 3 years, Diggs should see an uptick in his production, and he had a great year last year. Not to mention a healthy Dalvin Cook, which should make the defense honest and continue to keep drives alive for Minnesota. I mean, you're talking about a guy in Stefon Diggs that's a polished route runner, and it allows him to get open often. QBs had a NFL second best passer rating when targeting Diggs last year at 120.4. And he did not have a game last year below 4 targets. So I just think as a guy that's consistent and gets open, Stefon Diggs should see an uptick and should be on your radar. And for me, we're talking about a guy just last in Demaryius Thomas. Give me Stefon Diggs over Demaryius Thomas.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely fair. You're looking at Stefon Diggs. This guy is a gifted athlete. And not only is he a gifted athlete, but he excels on the field. This guy is a red zone catching machine. When the ball comes his way, he catches 85% of his targets. I know you touched on the Cousins, which guess what? Cousins loves to target guys down the field and down the sideline on toss-up plays. Exactly what Stefon Diggs loves to run. When you look at that 9 route, he is extremely accurate on running that and catching. He did a whopping 70% on that route. So you got to love that. He only had 88 targets last year, but I think that's more to say about Case Keenum than it is about Kirk Cousins. Now, yes.
You've mentioned that 9 route twice now. Can you kind of elaborate on that for the listeners?
Oh, thank you, Travis. So a 9 route, it's a route tree, and there are 9 routes within that route tree that wide receivers will run, and they're all numbered differently. The 9 route is the go route or the straight line route. You just straight up turn on the wheels and the jets, and you just go. And that's, us fantasy players, we love that one because that's if you're playing, NFL blitz, that's the bomb play, So and fantasy players, we love that because that's a home run hit if you can hit on that. We saw that play ran when Minnesota actually beat New Orleans. That's what the walk-off was just a go route. Well, it was a slight variation of the go route. It was a little bit of a flag as well as a go route, but that's besides the point. Just know that you really, really like to run the 9 route, and Diggs excels at that. And if you look at the rest of his success by route, by Matt Harmon, he does a wonderful piece, Matt Harmon's reception perception. His entire route tree is greener than your mom's Christmas tree on Christmas Eve. I mean, this thing, he is just in the upper echelon of elite wide receivers on all of these categories. So give me Stefon Diggs. I completely agree with you. If I can choose between Diggs and DT, I think I'm going to go based on their values right now. I'm going Diggs. And I know that last week, we're going to just to touch on last week, we talked about this thing happening between Adam Thielen and Diggs, and we thought the better value was in Diggs. And we also said that Adam Thielen might slide a bit. And I looked at the ADP today, and that exactly has happened already. Adam Thielen was going around 309, where Diggs was going right around 401. Continue to see that slide as people start to catch on to Kirk Cousins and what he likes to do and what kind of ways he likes to use his wide receivers. So I definitely love me some Diggs on this year. All right, you have something to add, Travis?
Yeah, I just wish you wouldn't bring my mom and her Christmas tree into this, bro. Like,
I'm sorry,
really getting to me, man. Had enough of it.
It's all right. Christmas will be right around the corner, okay? All right. Speaking of Christmas, or what could be Christmas, a guy that I definitely project to be a possible guy who jumps into that elite status. We talked about in the beginning of the show, a guy that could go into a top 3 wide receiver slot, at least for me, and that's Josh Gordon. Travis, I got a little something for you right here.
Okay.
Do you believe in Flash?
I do. Flash Gordon, or Josh Gordon, could be the savior of the Browns offense this year, Johnny. He was able to come back to the field after being absent since 2014. And look at the average he had in yards per catch, 18.6 yards. I mean, that's unbelievable after missing almost 3 years. He posted an average of 22.4 fantasy points per game back in that 2013 season, which is still one of the top 20 best wide receiver seasons of all time. You think of Tyrod Taylor, who spent last year being disrespected by the Bills, and then you back it up and you go 2016 and 2017 saw him post top 15 passer ratings when going 20 more yards down the field. This bodes well for Gordon's deep ball prospects, and we already know that he can be that guy that just goes, similar to some of the guys we've talked about before. I mean, the thing for me is that his upside is undoubtable as a top-tier wide receiver any week, but he also has a chance to be in the cellar due to the usage issues, because now all of a sudden the Browns have a stacked lineup with other mouths to feed. And so I just think that he could be a little bit volatile. But I think that if the price is right on Josh Gordon, he could pay off handsomely for you.
And I think you just touched on it very well, Travis. It's the price. Make sure you don't, we're talking about Josh Gordon here and being able to make that jump, but I'm already seeing in some mock drafts him going in like the second round or early in the third, and that's way too early for me. I think at that price point, you have to have him exceed in order for you to justify that pick. And for me, it's not justified there. But if he slides to you, in the beginning of the fourth or especially late in the fourth, I really, really do like him there. You're talking about a guy that from week 13 to week 16 of last year, he was wide receiver 25 after, coming off the couch for a year and a half. He was smoking the doobie and then decided to put it down finally, which is good for him. But, so he is wide receiver 25. The photos, I don't know if you've seen the photos. I mean, they look almost photoshopped. It's kind of insane. He looks super jacked. We've heard a lot of news come out from, the Browns media saying, Flash looks crazy athletic, back to what he showed before. I buy into it a little bit. I do. You're looking at, they showed last year that they were willing to give him the targets. They averaged 12 targets per game when he came out. So I do like his upside for sure. He definitely has the upside of a wide receiver, top 5. However, I don't want to buy into that hype too much and overpay for him. And I think that's what's starting to happen, unfortunately. So I don't know if I will own many shares of Josh Gordon this year, but I certainly will be keeping an eye on him for sure.
Yeah, we had a question here from Brett.
Yeah.
It says, more value if Tygod or Mayfield is declared the starter come week 1. And for me, Johnny, I think it's with Tyrod Taylor. Yep. Only because we don't know about the consistency with Baker yet. I think that Baker will project to have a great career in the NFL. But Tyrod Taylor, like I spoke on, is an excellent deep ball thrower. And so that should only help out Flash Gordon here for this. So give me Tyrod to help Josh Gordon's value.
And I couldn't agree with you more. Everything that you said was perfect. All right, moving on to the next wide receiver. We got Amari Cooper, who put up a big pooper last year. And man, Travis, do you think he's going to do that again? Or are you projecting he's going to bounce back? A lot of people think he's going to have a bounce back year. I mean, a lot of hype train. I mean, it's been going out of the Raiders nation. Are you buying into this, or are the numbers telling you something different?
Well, the numbers, you could let them scare you a little bit. And for me, I just think that Gruden has said two things to in the offseason. One is that he wants to make Cooper the focal point and the headliner of the offense. So for me, I trust Gruden in him saying that. He saw this roster when he took it in. They were okay with Crabtree leaving. They brought in Jordy Nelson to kind of fill that same kind of role. But Cooper is a guy who has been, when he's been good, he's been among the best. Unfortunately, when he's been bad, he's been among the worst.
Yeah.
But I do love Gruden, who loves to run the West Coast offense, which should benefit Cooper because Cooper has that elite speed and acceleration. And so you could see a lot of those posts and go routes where Cooper's going to be able to get that separation. He's been a top-tier route runner at times too. So if he gets in there and he starts working and Gruden can kind of activate and be that motivator that we know he is, then I trust Cooper to be there. He's a bit of a boom or bust risk, like I was saying, but the Raiders' talent with the fresh coaching change and the offensive line and Carr being there, I mean, they have all the right pieces to be an immediate bounce-back team, and I think that would be contingent on Cooper.
Yeah, I mean, you looked at his first-year targets, he had 118. You looked at his second-year targets, he had 120. And then all of a sudden, he dropped all the way down to 84. I kind of chalk that up to Derek Carr not being 100% healthy. However, the drops is a real concern for me. I watched a little bit of his tape, and I mean, he isn't very good, and he never has been good at going up and grabbing the ball at the main focal point. And so he's not a real contested catch kind of guy. He never has been, even back in Alabama. But one thing I will say, that he is going to be someone I'm going to watch closely in preseason. I think that John Gruden is a smart enough coach. We talked about Adam Thielen last episode and how he struggled a little bit to get off those man coverage, the man press and stuff. So what they did to counter that is they put him in the slot. And then all of a sudden, Adam Thielen had his breakout season last year. Now, if they do that same thing in Oakland, you could be looking at another bounce back season of him, because now he doesn't have that guy to press him right off the line. He can, worry about just catching the ball and then running after the catch. He doesn't have to worry about, all right, I got to jump. I got to, get this at the highest point. He's not facing really good corners, and they have the offensive weapons to do so. They brought in Martavis Bryant. They brought in Jordy Nelson. Both those guys are a little bit older, but it doesn't matter. They present speed on the outside, and you have to respect that. So if that happens, then I am surely going to buy into Amari Cooper if they put him in the slot. However, if we see him running the majority of his routes from the outside and maybe have Jordy Nelson in the slot, or they have Martavis Bryant in the slot, then I'm going to probably stay away from Amari Cooper this year.
Yeah, and I think that you can just kind of watch and see, obviously, like we're talking about, look at preseason, look at the training camp. But if Gruden's talking about him being a focal point, it's hard to make one wide receiver a focal point of an offense and not move him around. I mean, you just look at some of these offenses, like with Antonio Brown and with Odell Beckham Jr., what they have to do is move these guys around in order to get the defense to stay honest. So I have all the faith in the world that Gruden can draw up plays to make that happen.
All right. Speaking of drawing up plays to make things happen, our next wide receiver, that's basically his middle name, in Marvin Jones from Detroit. This guy is just known as just being a big play guy, Travis. When you're looking at last year, he did have 100 targets. However, he only had 57 catches on those 100 targets, which is a little bit of a head scratcher. But we talk about Matthew Stafford and how much he likes to throw. And, well, Marvin Jones had 19% of the target share last season, including 31% of the TD market share, which you got to love. You saw Eric Ebron now go to the Indianapolis Colts. So you have even less, touchdown guys to try to take away those touchdowns. He's not only going to get targets, but he is going to get maybe that elite wide receiver stat that we've been kind of hoping for. He's been on the verge of it, and we've seen it through weeks, but he's never really pulled through a whole entire season showing that. Since he came to the Lions in 2016, he has had 7 touchdowns and 8 touchdowns. I like to see that repeat, maybe even get up to 10 touchdowns. There is Kenny Golladay, who could take some red zone looks away. However, over the last 2 years, he's been a wide receiver 1 and 2 only 32% of the time. So you're talking about a big risk, but a big reward if it pays off. Again, this is a guy that's going in these late or middle rounds that could truly take that big jump. And we could be talking about him as a top 10 wide receiver next year on this very show. Travis, do you agree with those assessments? Are you in on Marvin Jones, or are you out with the Jones?
No, I'm a fan of Marvin Jones this year, right about where we have him at the 19th spot, and that could rise depending on a couple things that coming out of training camp and into preseason. But I'm glad you mentioned Kenny Golladay, right? Because that's the concern. There's a lot of hype around Golladay, him being the guy that's going to take over as heir apparent to Megatron and all these things that are coming out.
Or Mr. Kenny G, as the ladies like to call him.
Yeah, well, even if he takes a little bit of Marvin Jones targets, you look at Ebron. Ebron left, and that's 86 targets up for grabs. Yeah. So you think about the fact that Marvin Jones already had the 100 targets, as you said, and Ebron's going to give up some more of that target share. Last year, Marvin Jones led the league in yards per reception with 18. So it was healthy last year for him. 9th in receiving yards with 1,101. He also averaged 10 yards per target. So they love to go deep with Marvin Jones. And since drafting Stafford, in the 9 years that they've had Stafford, they've been in the top 10 in pass attempts every year. They will throw the football. And, Patricia came in, and yes, he's a defensive-minded coach, but they kept the best named offensive coordinator in the league, Jim Bob Cooter.
Jim Bob Cooter.
So that they're going to be throwing the ball to Marvin Jones. The continuity's there. I think with Ebron giving up some targets, give me some Marvin Jones. This definitely could be a breakout year for him again. And he's 28. So, he saved a lot of his legs not being so productive in the beginning of his career.
All right. Now we finally get to bring my guy back into this conversation of this show.
Johnny.
He's been off the show a little bit.
Johnny, what do you got over there?
I got Alshon Jeffery. Who's throwing him the ball again?
Your boy, Carson Wentz.
That's right. Alshon Jeffery is coming in as our wide receiver 20 on today's show. And I'm going to kick this off because he's related to, Travis and I have a whisper bet going on between Carson Wentz and Deshaun Watson. And I'm staring down his number 1 wide receiver here. And Alshon finally played a full season last year, which I love. And he had 111 targets in that season. However, a lot like Marvin Jones, a little bit of a head scratcher is he only caught 56 of them. So I'm a little, questioning that. But he does come down with a lot of touchdowns. He had 9 last year. He's a big target. He had 21% of his team's target share last season and 24% of the TD market share. With Mike Wallace coming into town and another year for Nelson Aguilar, and hopefully a healthy Carson Wentz, my fingers are crossed, I think it'll be hard for teams to double team him. And I look for his TDs to take a slight hit. I don't expect 9. I could expect about 7. But I do expect his yardage to go up. I think his targets might come down a little bit, but you're talking about a guy who only had 56 catches last year. If he can improve on that to, let's say, 80 catches, which is pretty reasonable on 100, 105 targets. I really like the outcome for Alshon. Now, don't get me wrong. I don't think Alshon will finish as a top wide receiver, but I think right where we have him is pretty solid. Travis, go ahead and give us your feedback on Alshon Jeffery.
Yeah, I mean, the computer just couldn't handle all the love, man. Anyway, so what I've got going here is, for me, that Alshon Jeffery took a chance last year and wanted to be paid handsomely in free agency. It didn't work out too well. He signed the 1-year deal to bet on himself with Philly, and so therefore they paid him off. I mean, they gave him a 4-year deal after a third of the season. Johnny touched on the fact that the catches are not there, but I think that's because he had the league's worst amount of separation on completions with 1.8 yards. So you wonder if that's sustainable or the reason for the small amount of receptions. He has finished as a top 15 wide receiver in standard scoring for 3 of the last 5 years, and his size and strength should continue his high touchdown upside. So my only concern is he's coming off a rotator cuff surgery this offseason, so be sure to monitor that as he returns. But I think for the most part, as long as he's back in time, he should continue as the number one downfield threat in a very well-rounded, high-producing Eagles offense. So I think the value is there for where he's going right now.
Yep, I couldn't agree with you more. I think that his value is definitely excellent, and I think he's definitely going to be a guy that I might target in several leagues, knowing that he has the ability to be a very solid, well, I shouldn't say very solid because he's hit or miss, but I do expect him to be a wide receiver 2 going into this season. All right, Travis, that's it for today's show. Thank you guys so much for joining us and staying tuned while we had a little bit of technical difficulty. Make sure you check out our YouTube page. Go like our Facebook page and subscribe to it, as well as subscribe to YouTube, and get our latest show and podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, or Google Play. Just search the Fantasy Whisperers podcast or go to thefantasywhisperers.com. Until next time, I'm Johnny Game Time Hicks, and that's Big Travie, and we're out.
Peace.
Peace. Ta-da, 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 ta-da.